want to say hello to everybody and thank you for being here. We have an interesting program for you this evening. Excuse me, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Sandy Butler, author of several books. The most recent one completed last evening, but each of her books are designed to identify something unspoken and to move these issues into the public discourse. So Sandy was the winner of the Lambda Literary Award in 1988 for her work about a gay couple navigating the death of a partner. And she has also explored the intersection of aging and mothering while challenging the myths around both of these.
As it can get.
She writes with a sharp humor and refreshing honesty, and brings a fresh perspective to the changing chapters of all of our lives. So today, Sandy will chronicle her experience of moving from aging all the way to old, forgetting frustrations with technology, and which she explores in her book, The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Being Old. I love that one. And leaving home at 83, which many of us will no doubt identify with. You can also find Sandy on YouTube. Look for On Writing, Identity, and Aging Boldly, where she discusses leaving home at 83. And you can find her on the web at sandrabutler.net. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sandy, and thank you again for being with us this evening.
My pleasure, Eleanor. Hi, everybody. So let me talk just a little bit about who I've been and where I am now before we begin to talk together, which is, of course, my favorite part, about the ideas that my books intend to raise. So, as Eleanor said, I wrote 3 books designed to illuminate subjects that were not being discussed in the public square. The first one in 1978 was the first feminist analysis of incest, and it was called Conspiracy of Silence. Second one was called Cancer in Two Voices, about both the life of a couple, me, I was part of that couple, and the politics of women's health care. And the third one also was, as Eleanor mentioned, a book called It Never Ends, which is about what it means to mother as we are aging and our children are aging. So when we have kids in their 50s and we're in our 70s, we're still mothering them, but everything about the nature of the relationship, the need for one another, it's all really very, very different. So for that book, I interviewed over 70 women with a broad demographic range to see what the experience was. And that book actually turned out to be a more melancholy book than I thought it would. Mothers had very much more need of their daughters than their daughters had of them. Their daughters were in the middle of very busy, active lives in their own families, their own work lives. And the mothers felt less central, less needed, less more important. So it was a very useful book and widely read, and as I say, unexpectedly melancholy. Of course, I had all the same feelings myself, but I didn't know that all the women I was going to interview were going to have all the same feelings. You never know that until you start talking to other women. So that was the first 3 books that I wrote, and it was until somebody's sound is up, I think. Anyhow, it was not until I was 80 that I began to write in my own voice. I had worked to invite and do groups and trainings to invite women into their own voice, to tell their own stories, to take their lives seriously. Something I'm doing now in memoir classes, I might add. It's bringing women into full voice. That's kind of been the work I've done all my life in one way or another. And somehow when I turned 80, I thought, I think it's my turn to write in my voice about my life and to make myself the center of the subject that I wanted to address. And that subject was oldness. And I wanted to think about oldness as a life stage like adolescence, with all of the growth and the loss and the changes and the uncertainty. And so I wrote the first book called The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Being Old. And I will just read you a short excerpt from the introduction to give you a sense of my voice. I am not a woman who is older or elderly or mature. I'm neither plucky nor a burden, and not over any hills except the steep ones. I am very specifically old, to be sure. White, once middle class, now a full economic level down from there. Once tall, and now several inches less than that. It appears that some things shrink over the years as others expand. The questions I ask myself have shifted. What is it like to have a body that is starting to break down? A mind that is becoming more porous? Finances that feel precarious? What is it I value? How do I define a good day? What's the changing nature of my friendships, many of which are decades long? What matters has shifted. So much that seemed crucial and fueled my middle-aged life, being successful, admired, chosen, productive, have all fallen away, leaving in its wake a great rush of relief. Unlike middle-aged Michelle Obama, I am no longer becoming. I have become. My children are middle-aged and continuing to grow in their fullness. I, on the other hand, have reached what appears to be the maximum level of my maturity. And while I'm more adult in public than I am in private, this has always been the case. I'm not nearly as kind as I intended to become, but at least greatly improved from the earnest young woman who valued certainty over ambiguity. I'm less evaluative about how and why people behave as they do, because I've learned over and over again how tremendously complicated it is to be a human being. I'm still vain, although I wish I wasn't, mostly about my hair. While my discipline is somewhat improved, my adventurousness remains on the timid side. Knowing what to expect, insofar as that is possible, still comforts me. But I keep reaching for my best self, and finally I am clear about who that self is. I bump against ageism in the ways people relate to me and to the reality of oldness, much as I once learned to more clearly identify and recognize racism and sexism. There are a lot of things that are funny about being old, but only if an old woman tells them. I delight in the freedom that oldness confers, at least the freedom not to care about so many of the things that once seemed so important. I'm contentedly set in most of my hard-won ways. While I understand that being set can be interpreted as timid or rigid, unwilling to try something new like watercolors, ballroom dancing, choral singing, line dancing, or gardening, that time came and instantly evaporated. I have become fond of my ways since they took so many decades to figure out what they were. They're what remain after years of painful, grudging, and fearful release of self-protective behaviors and choices, all of which involve psychotherapy, foolish relationships, and way too many gin and tonics. My ways make sense to me. And perhaps if Frank Sinatra hadn't gotten there first, I might have titled this book, My Ways. These days, I inhabit a world where people have practices, spiritual ones, yogic ones, psychological ones. I've been old for a while now, so it seems fitting that I design a personal practice of oldness. But I'm filled with wanting, and practices frown on desirousness of all kinds. I want to accompany my friends as they approach the end of their lives. I want to see how things turn out politically in these unimaginable times. I want to take walks by the water, even as those walks get increasingly slower, punctuated by longer periods of sitting and augmented by hiking poles. I want to read, have long talks with loved ones, keep fresh flowers on my coffee table. Practices are more focused on yielding to what is, with the emphasis on the here and now. While I appear to be an unruly candidate to begin a practice already chafing against the constraints of cultivating a sense of awe at each new moment, never going to happen. The evaporation of my memory does lend an often bewildered openness. So in the oft repeating movement that Jews have been practicing for centuries, I lift my shoulders in a small shrug and remind myself that what I want has nothing to do with anything. It's going to be how I manage whatever comes. That central reality is embedded in teachings of spirituality and psychology, so I will now consider myself in the throes of a practice. Here I go. I wrote that when I was 80. I am now 87. My thinking has not changed, but it's certainly expanded and deepened since then. A couple of things to place me in the context of my life so that you have a sense of where my thinking and my words are coming from. I am a very centrally second wave feminist. Consciousness raising changed my life. Saying things out loud in front of other women, other people who are trustworthy, inviting that of other women has been at the heart of my life. I also very deeply feel and am aware that we are the first generation of feminists to age consciously. There has never been a generation where oldness is written about, is understood, has become a profession, has resources. It's in some ways commodified, and in other ways open for exploration and examination as a stage of life. So that's the location from which I entered my 80s and I'm moving through my 80s. So one very brief other excerpt from Kitchen, just to give you a sense of the kinds of short essays that constitute this book. This is called an epitaph for my memory. My memory has gone the way of my upper arms. It softens and it wobbles. My proper nouns have been evaporating for over a decade. And I've learned to keep going when a specific name, place, or object has absconded instead of pausing and looking confused. Now, to add insult to injury, when I'm telling a proper nounless story and a splendid illuminating detail certain to enhance my enthusiastic narration surfaces, I no longer reach for it because I've had to painfully acknowledge that I won't be able to find my way back to wherever it was I was trying to go. Replacing the evaporated nouns and details are irrelevant pieces of information that have taken root like weeds alongside the highway. At the market, I'm less able now to keep track of whether I'm either low or out of a staple that is critical to the functioning of my kitchen. So just to be on the safe side, I'll buy another. As of this writing, I have 4 jars of Hellman's mayo, 2 Heinz ketchups, 2 mango chutneys, and 3 bags of low-salt almonds taking up precious space on my kitchen shelves. It's not that I don't have a well-ordered shopping list, I do. It remains poised, ready for service, on my desk, long after I drive away from the house. And as I forget what I want to say or buy or do, I remember what doesn't and never did matter. My mind is cluttered with obscure facts about Xavier Cugat, who was born on January 1st, 1900, and Louis Armstrong, who claimed to be, and copious details about the early lives of Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, and Farley Granger, whose posters filled my bedroom walls before I knew they were all gay and consequently unavailable to appreciate my teenage longings. I've retained the names and histories of all of Elizabeth Taylor's husbands in order, Richard Burton twice, as well as the disheartening details of the early childhoods and marital adventures of Ava Gardner, Judy Garland, and Billie Holiday. The lyrics to Jerome Kern's ballads are on the tip of my tongue, but what I need at the pharmacy evaporates between my house and the store. My eye drops are more critical than the words "to smoke gets in your eyes," but my memory does not give them that priority. So that is a peek at my first book at writing in my voice about my experiences in a way that I hope would invite other women to assess and reflect on their own parallel experiences. So that's kind of part 1. Part 2, which is leaving home at 83, is a very different kind of book. It's a memoir, it's a personal story about me, one long personal story about me. But it's one that evokes larger themes that we'll get to in our conversation, I hope. So when I was 83, the entire infrastructure of my life changed. One of my closest friends moved away to live near her daughter. Another was dying, and I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I became, as a result of all of those, the admixture of those things, completely destabilized. So I want to talk just a little bit about what that meant for me and why it's important for us all to think about. I got scared. And when I got scared, I got little. I got scared in the way I was scared as a little kid. I didn't get scared as a grown-up. And at that point, at 83, I really thought I had a pretty good working relationship with the range of my feelings. all of my feelings, envy, competition, loss, being a public person. I had thought about them. I had worked on them in therapy. And if anyone had asked me prior to that time, do you feel you are psychologically really familiar with yourself? I would have said, absolutely. So just to give you another piece of background, after my mother died and I was tremendously, tremendously depressed, I was in therapy, and it was one of the very early sessions where you're giving the therapist the 101 of your life. When I was 22, I moved here, and then my husband, and then a divorce, and then the kids, and I was just giving her that kind of background. And in my saying that, I said, and after our divorce, I moved into Manhattan with my two young daughters to try to find a job and make a life for us. And my therapist said, "You must have been so scared." And I was so startled by her saying that, because I realized in that moment I had not allowed any kind of scared to surface, because I had to find a job and I had to get the kids into a school, and there was things that needed to happen, and I was in charge of my life and their life, and I had to take the next step. I have done that all of my life. Through deaths and divorces and political difficulties, I take the next step. That is what I have done. This was the first time in my life that I was scared, and I felt scared, and I didn't know what to do. So what I did was make up a whole bunch of stories that would kind of put me in a good light and make all of this very disruptive time feel manageable. So at that point, I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. Both my daughters were in Phoenix, accompanying their father, who was then 96, he was going for 100, he was 96, and they were helping him. They brought him out from New York. He was in a residential community and assisted living, and becoming less and less able to function autonomously. And both the girls and their busy middle-aged lives were folded in with their dad to be present, to love him, to support him, and take care of the things that he couldn't do. So that's the life my daughters were living in Phoenix. The story that I told myself was the following. You have all thought this, I know we have all thought this, but it means something different to each of us. And the thought is, I don't want to be a burden. So I had that thought, and I remembered that my mother, who dug her paper-thin heels in when she lived in Boston and I was in California, and when I tried to convince her to move to be closer to me when she was in her late 80s, I don't want to be a burden to you. I'm staying where I am. Well, of course, what that meant, as you're obviously aware, is every time my mother had bronchitis or anything, I had to fly across the country to take care of her, which was seriously a burden for me. So I finally did convince my mother to move to be closer to me, but it was a very painful, disruptive process for her in a way I absolutely didn't understand. And that's another detail that I hope perhaps we could talk about, which is that I was in my 60s, my mother was in her 80s. All I wanted was for her to be secure and safe, and let me take her to lunch and show her, go take her to the museum. I had no understanding of what it was meaning for her to leave the house that she shared with my father, to not know where the cleaner is, to not know where anything is, to be completely uprooted from everything that was familiar, because you can't know that at 60. And it's so interesting to me with my kids now. The things that they cannot see about my life is because they're just too young to understand what it is to be us. So I'm going to come back to that when I read the last piece that's from the next book, but I just wanted to bookmark it here. So I thought to myself, okay, I won't be a burden. I'll go to Phoenix. I'll be right there. So if anything goes wrong, my kids will be right there and it'll be easy for them. That was one story I made up out of whole cloth. The second story was, as you may have intuited from the title of the last book, I am not a domestic person. I don't like it. I'm not good at it. It's not my thing. I don't cook. I don't garden. It's not my thing. I thought, okay, I'll go into a residential community. There'll be 3 meals, there'll be activities. It'll be terrific. My kids will be down the street. This is good for everybody. And with that completely manufactured story, I left my life of 50 years and I moved to Phoenix in an apartment in a residential community I had never even seen, because all of this was with such terrified impulsivity that I could not acknowledge to myself that I just flew out of the Bay Area to Phoenix. The minute I got to, I'm calling it here, Desert Manor, not the actual name, but that's what I'm calling it. I knew it was a mistake. As soon as I got there, I knew it was a mistake. So I'll read you just a little bit from this section. My daughters were with me. Taking the elevator to the 3rd floor, we walked down the brown linoleum hallway designed to look like wood. It didn't. My apartment was in the Jewish quarter, so named, I later learned, because of Shana, a resident whose Jewish-themed paintings covered both sides of the mushroom-colored walls. Beside each door was a shelf designed to provide the residents with an opportunity to express their individuality, make a statement about who they were, or a changing announcement of the holidays they celebrated. We passed artwork that signaled, "Here lives lovers of Brooklyn, Christ, Israel, and grandchildren." Arriving at my apartment, I found it was, as the videos had indicated, spacious. The living room opening onto a large balcony I was to share with an extended family of pigeons. What the videos had carefully left out was that the pigeons used it as an outhouse. There was pigeon shit everywhere, and undoubtedly lots more to come. All the shit in the dominant view of the rooftops of neighboring houses put an end to my fantasies of watching the sun rise and set, having morning coffee, and reading in the late afternoon. The pigeons had already claimed the territory. So the rest of this story is a story about how I found my way into an environment that was completely unfamiliar and the absolutely wrong fit for me, which I'll get to when I talk a little bit more about the ideas of institutional living. There were a lot of people there who felt like they were in summer camp all day, every day. It was perfect for them. They had been responsible for their home and for the food and for the money and for their kids and for the backyard and for the animal, and they didn't have to be responsible for anything. They were loving it. And then there were people more like me who were there because their lives weren't working anymore, because they couldn't remember, because they fell, because their bodies weren't working, or their minds weren't working, or they had run out of money, or because their kids had said they couldn't drive anymore and they lived not in an urban place. All the reasons that people can no longer continue forward in their lives. And what they did was to create, which is what everybody does, to create as similarly as possible the life you left behind, which was, in this particular confluence of people, a very conventional life. And I am many things, and I've been many things. Conventional has never, ever been one of the things that I am. And I stuck out like a sore thumb, except that it was a sore thumb that people found curious. I was unfamiliar to most of the people there. And as a result of that, and the storytelling in the book will explain it to you much more thoroughly than I need to here, I became the person who made things happen. I made circles and I made gatherings and I made events and I made rituals and I made ceremonies and I made parties and I made things that I had been doing all my life that were unfamiliar to a lot of the women and some of the men there also. And so I was admired, I was looked up to, I was seen as special. But one of the things that happens, and some of you probably know this, when you're admired and looked up to and special, even though it's a good feeling for a minute, it's also you're othered. You're not like everybody else. You're an other, even though you're an admired other. And I was an admired other. But I was so lonely. I was so terribly, terribly, terribly lonely. Um, about 8 months after I got there, my younger daughter said at one of our lunches, you know, Mom, maybe Tucson would be a better place for me. She said it very skillfully. She put herself first. Maybe it would be a better place for me for my work. It's more liberal, it's more blue, it's more artistic, it's culturally a little bit more spacious than Phoenix. Maybe we should take a drive down and see what you think about Tucson. She had been down there several times for work meetings. And I thought to myself, we don't need to take a drive down. I'll pack up right this minute. But having already done my impulsive, crazy thing, I thought, let me keep that thought to myself. And I said in a very motherly, adult way, that's a lovely idea, sweetheart. Let's take a drive to Tucson. And that is what brought me to Tucson. It got me out of Phoenix and into where I am now in Tucson with the mountains, and the sky in Tucson is quite extraordinary. So the book, this story concludes with the following paragraph. I sit on a much smaller balcony now, one with no pigeons and a glorious view of the mountains and the astonishing sunrises. I am an 86-year-old Jewish lesbian feminist, one who reads and writes, who prays and asks questions, and one who tries to make the world I'm in just a little bit better. After these long months of wandering, I have found my new home. So that's this book. As Eleanor said, although you didn't say it with the details, I sent off book 3, which is going to be the trilogy of the books that I've written in my 80s, last night at 9:15. And I remember the time because I was so excited I couldn't fall asleep till 1 o'clock. It was 9:15 that I pressed send, and the book has gone to my publisher and will be in the world in September. And this book is called Now What? Notes from the Front Lines of Old Age. So this is the part that I want to talk about. Maybe I'll read this first, and then I'll move to talking about the ideas that I'm hoping we can have a conversation about. So this new book is organized pretty much around the same way that Kitchen Was Closed is organized, short pieces about what it is to be in your life as an old woman. But now I'm really old, and then I was what the gerontologist called young old. I'm formally old. One of the things that was one of the, I'll just read just a little bit from one of the chapters, and it's called Confessions of a Lying Old Woman. Living alone when you're my age requires lying. There is no way around it. It isn't that I mean to lie. It's that I want to avoid the conversation that will immediately ensue if I don't. The people who monitor my life, as in my daughters, need to feel reassured that I'm eating healthily, exercising and sleeping enough, and being engaged. Engaging means different things to them than to my aging friends, but they are the ones to whom I must answer. Consequently, all these expectations occasion more and more lying, my form of which is most often that of smiling indirection. I assure my daughters that I eat vast quantities of fruits, vegetables, salmon, and chicken. There is rarely any mention of my consumption of popcorn, rum raisin ice cream, or pistachios. When we're having a meal together, I am careful to order a big slab of protein surrounded by leafy green leaves. I demur when offered crackers and cheese and murmur daintily with a downcast expression, dairy. Until they read this, I'll continue to feel confident I've gotten away with those lies. I lie not only by indirection, but also by omission about the frequency of my accidents. They include tripping over, stumbling into, brushing against, and worst of all, following all the way down. I'm uncertain if not telling my children that I fell down constitutes withholding necessary information, yet another permutation of lying, but I suspect it does. Why is it anybody's business? They'll just worry and have advice, which are bromides I already know. Be careful, only do one thing at a time, move slowly, use arnica. The only person who knows I fell is my Apple Watch, who dutifully flashed, I see that you fell. Do you need help? Should I call 911? I pressed back, I'm fine, essentially lying in whatever language they have programmed for a response. I hobbled upstairs, hurriedly put the freezer food in the freezer and the refrigerator food in the refrigerator, then lay down and went to sleep. I've concluded that I'm handling the situation maturely. Behind my agreeable face is an old woman holding fiercely to her wavering autonomy. I wonder if the middle-aged children of aging parents yield to parental obfuscations and equivocations, little lies we tell, because they may not really want to know about the forgetting, falling, creative eating, losing, bumping into sharp objects, and talking to themselves, realities that define their parents' lives. Would my daughters really want to know what goes on when they aren't around? The challenges I face every day and all that I go through to be able to live my life the way I want to live it? Do they and so many other children of aging parents worry that the more they know, the more they may have to step towards us and our increasingly precarious hold on independence and fold us into their lives? Because that's where all this is eventually going, isn't it? Our lying is buying us time, time that we want as our own. And I'll continue to lie as long as I can get away with it. So that's kind of a sense of my voice, my concerns, my writing. What I want to do now is just spend a little bit of time extrapolating all of this into a conversation that we can have together. So everybody is going to have to consider at some point whether to age-proof where you're living now, to downsize, to move to be near your kids, to move into some kind of residential facility. And there isn't any right answer. But what you can do is not what I did. To the degree you can be, I wrote it down how I wanted to say it, here it is, a clear-eyed, unsentimental knowledge of yourself and your life. So there's a couple of things that I just want to lift up to consider. Each of us is somewhere on the continuum of autonomy and dependency. Some of us, like me, worked really, really hard for our autonomy. I had a very, very powerful mother. And my efforts to find my own authority and not defer to hers was a big part of my developmental work moving into adulthood. And I have always been proud of my autonomy. And as I described earlier, whatever life gives me, I take the next step. I'm responsible, I hold it together, I'm autonomous. What I didn't know and what I enacted in my fleeing to Phoenix was the deep, unacknowledged yearning that I had to be taken care of. And I think that that's something for us to lift up and look at and see to what degree is that part of what needs to be factored into how we think about making the decisions we're going to have to make about going forward. Some women find it really easy to ask for help, are appreciative of receiving it. It's not psychologically part of their beginnings that's tangled up at all. And other women, like me, find asking, needing is the deeper word than asking, but needing something that I can't provide for myself, psychologically really, really disruptive and difficult. There isn't any right or good way to be. It's about being clear with what kind of a person you are, which will help you think about what kind of a life you need to make in whatever your next chapter is. It's a critical, heart of the matter kind of question. There's a couple of others that I want to raise too. Moving to be near the kids. It's like work that I did with women who were doing their end of life paperwork. One woman in particular I was working with, and she had two kids, and she said, well, I mean, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to do it 50-50. Well, one of her kids made a handsome living, and the other had her grandchild was on the spectrum, was going to need a lot of support services in their life. And 50-50 did not take into account the reality of the lives of her children. what it took into account was what her moral and ethical idea was. But in addition to our moral and ethical ideas are the realities of the lives that our children are leading and how we proportion out our resources. That's just one example. But moving to be near a kid requires us to be, again, I'll use that word, unsentimental about, is this kid a nurturing caregiver or just really a smart, funny, interesting kid who's not really very nurturing, or you don't get along with the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law, or they live in a place where the geography it would be just too hard for you to navigate as an old person. I mean, we have to be so straightforward about all these kinds of questions so that we can shape this chapter of our lives in a way that's what we need it to be. Some of us, I'm one of them. I really love predictability. I love Wednesday to be like Tuesday. It comforts me that I have my little morning rituals and my little evening rituals. And some people are not like that at all. This is another thing, because you can adapt much more easily if you don't need predictability. That was one of the things that was hard for me. Your relationship to risk. Some people are really risk adverse. Some people don't find risk dangerous or scary at all. What your resources are, what your friendship networks are, your religious, spiritual, political networks, what the state of health is, all that kind of stuff, that all has to be lifted up, looked at, ideally talked over with as many people, with as many points of view as possible, because this is a chapter that we can shape. And for women, and I'll speak to the women very specifically, so much of our lives has been spent helping to support, encourage the lives of the people we love. And for many of us, not enough time has been spent putting ourselves at the center. It took me till I was 80 to put myself in the center. So if you're going to put yourself in the center and you're thinking about how to go forward, these are all some of the really important questions I think are useful to think about, and some of what I've tried to talk about in these two books and again in this third book. So I will end with all that and stop talking and get to the best part of it for me, which is to listen to what you have to say and what questions you have and see what the conversation looks like. So I open it for questions. And if any of you who are not on the screen could put yourself on the screen so when you're talking, I can see you, that'd be great. So who has a question?
You want to take on? Should we read?
So I'll step forward. I don't have a question. This has just been wonderful to listen to, Sandy. And I find at certain places along, that I say, oh yeah, I know that. I recognize that. That's me too. And and a lot of places, so many that I can't honestly remember them all now. But I do like your third book.
I do.
Um,
Good out.
Yeah, I've lost it. I'm sorry. I had a specific question. I didn't write it down because my pen quit on me.
Okay, it'll come back.
Okay, please do. Maybe somebody else will have it too.
Okay. Yeah, hi.
Hi, thanks so much. You are a delight. Very eye-opening, lots to think about. The other issue that I think about, we have a child on the West Coast and one child close to us here. And the West Coast daughter, when she first moved there, wanted us to move there. And we have seen enough where people move to be near their children and then the children up and move.
Uh-huh.
So that has always been a caveat for me, that we have a friend who moved to the East Coast because both their kids were on the East Coast, and one moved back to the Midwest and one was talking about moving to Florida, and here they are. Probably they're not as old as we are, but probably in their 70s, and where they don't really, they're not grounded there. They don't have a lot of friends there. People have trouble finding a faith community if that's important to them. And it's just never appealed to us. Thank goodness to either one of us, so we agree on it. But that's a real scary thing in your 80s to pick up and go to another community. And by yourself, even though you were going to daughters,
Right.
that's just, and I'm a pretty good risk taker and I'm very flexible, but it doesn't appeal to me. I've got such a wonderful support system here of lifelong friends and everything I could possibly want except winter. I could do without winter, but there's so many things to think about. And I think your point of evaluating all of those things is such a wonderful piece of wisdom for people. And thank you for kind of underlining it for me and just for putting it out there for people. I hope your books are a huge success.
They are, and thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I think what I want to say about that is that I appreciate you're raising this because it is another consideration. Do you have children whose work lives leave them more mobile, and which would therefore put you at risk for them leaving after you move to town? So, I mean, I appreciate that. I'll remember to say that when I talk about this part of things. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one thing that comes to mind, I had a daughter who passed away about 10 years ago, and I have a son remaining. And my daughter was very nurturing and very, she lived in San Diego, and she and her husband were thinking about building, I guess they have an ordinance in her community that allows what they call granny huts in the back, granny houses or whatever they call them. And they were seriously considering doing that, putting one in their backyard. And I said, no, no, don't do it for me, let somebody else live there. And I never really thought of living in San Diego, and now she's passed away in her. And so, that option is, if it ever was an option, is no longer. And my son is a wonderful son. He's very attentive. But, boys are socialized differently.
Yes, they
And
are.
they are not, I can't say he's nurturing. I can say he's very attentive. And those are two different things. And so I probably, unless I'm on my last two legs, I probably won't ever consider moving to he lives in Wisconsin, near Madison. So, and winter's okay. I like winter, but, I know I'll fall one day and I'll feel differently about it. But I know I just think that your children are different, and you're different, and I don't know that. And I have seen, as Jackie has mentioned, one person in particular, a village member actually, who moved to her son's place at her son's insistence because he wanted to take care of her. And she passed away in, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months. And she was miserable there, and she lost her support system. She got her son's family. I don't know her son, and he may have visited her daily. I don't know. But her support system was so important to her. And, she lost it. And
This reminds me probably the most heartbreaking thing that my mother said when we were in this process. And I didn't understand what she was saying. I do now. She said to me, if I come to be with you, I'll be in also.
Uh,
And I completely understand what that means now. But when I was 60, I just brushed right by it and said, oh no, Mom, it's going to be so much fun. We'll go here and there's this. And I couldn't, it didn't have any meaning for me. And she was absolutely right. When she came here, she wasn't also, she was Sandy's mother. Yeah. Yeah. So what this means for you, Eleanor, is that decisions going forward will keep you where you are with your support system. And so then the decisions are safety, bars, smaller steps, that kind of level of adaptation to aging, but that you have the geography clear in your mind.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But I also live in a condo association where some of the adaptations, at least in my house, the physical adaptations are going to be difficult because of sometimes because of, I think, I don't know, I'm thinking about the kinds of structural changes that I can do and some that I can't do because of condo regulations and rules and that sort of thing. I just don't know. So, you know, it's going to be a difficult choice when I get there.
Mhm. Well, let me just say, try to get there before you get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're left making major life decisions in a moment of crisis. And those are never good decisions, as I lived and wrote a whole book about. Those are never good decisions. Yeah.
Mm.
Sandra, it makes me think about, you said were working with women and helping them create their end of life documents or paperwork. And I worked in hospice for 18 years. But what we always said, what our philosophy was, is always seems too soon until it's too late.
Right.
And, but it really is hard. Like now you say you really understand what your mother meant that she would be, and also that you until you've walked in those shoes, it's really hard to have that level of empathy. Or
Well, one of the things that was so revealing is the piece that I read from about my lying to my kids appeared in the Huffington Post. And I
Oh,
have many hundreds of emails from old women and some old men saying, thank you for saying this. We know exactly what you mean, and we do exactly the same thing, and we appreciate your saying it. And I also got many hundreds of emails from daughters in their 60s saying, that's terrible that you're putting that in the world. How am I going to take care of my mother if she's not telling me the truth and you're encouraging her to lie, and I won't have the information that I need to take care of her? And with each one of those, I thought to myself, I mean, I answered each one, but I thought privately, think about this in 20 years. Go back to this in your mind in 20 years, and it'll look different to you than it does now, because we're standing at such different psychological and developmental locations in this moment. Yeah. Yeah.
well, and I think often I've noticed, I don't know about my own experience, but I have seen other people who lie to their kids, as we all do, of course, and the kids appreciate it because they don't really want, they don't understand,
That's
and they
exactly.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I used to call my mother, when I was in my 60s, I mean, we had a very good and loving relationship to the degree that women of our mothers' generations didn't speak intimately, didn't have psychological language. I mean, there was a certain cultural, generational truth. But given all that, we had made our way to a really good relationship, and I wanted her to be happy. But I also had 2 kids. I was working. I had a very, very busy life. And so I would call her on Sunday morning and I would say, and I'm almost embarrassed now to say this to you. So does the butcher still deliver, and what are you getting, and is it fresh, and are you getting the paper by the door so you don't have to go down to the lobby? And I had a whole list of questions so that in my mind, when I got to the end of them, I could think, okay, she's okay. You know, does Alma come and pick you up when you go to play bridge, and does she drop you right in front? And if it's slushy, do you wear your boots, and all the questions? And at the end of the conversation, I would think, okay, mom's okay. It never occurred to me to wonder what my mother felt when she hung up the phone, and all the unasked questions and all the conversations she wanted to have. There was no place for them because I didn't know. I didn't know to say, what are you thinking about? Or what are you dreaming about? What do you wonder about? Or what's on your mind? Or anything. I just wanted to be sure she was okay. And now my kids know that because they've heard me tell this, so they make an effort when they call me, you know, which is, you know, I know that they're remembering to do that, so they do that, and it's sort of touching, but it's not exactly it. Uh, but there's just some fullness of the lives of our mothers when they're our age that we just didn't comprehend. We just absolutely didn't comprehend in a way that our kids, as loving as they are, don't comprehend, which is, in my view, all the more important that we're as clear as we can be with ourselves and with other women. So one of the stories, I think I said this to you, Eleanor, and I don't remember if I did. I was giving a talk at the San Francisco Village. Oh, I did tell you, Eleanor. So it was a talk at the San Francisco Village. And I said, my secret wish whenever I do one of these talks is that it'll end up in a circle that will meet weekly so that people can talk about all these things with one another honestly, and listen to how other women and other men come at it and what their questions are, because sometimes hearing how other people wrestle with things illuminates things for us. And because I come from a history in a world where making circles is what I do. I mean, that's part of the political work I've done all my life, is make circles. And so one of the women who had clearly not had an experience of a circle raised her hand and said, well, I mean, if we made a circle, what would be the subjects we talk about? And what would be the first things how would we start? I mean, she was eager, but clearly bewildered. And I said, how about the first thing you talk about is, what does it feel like to use the word old to describe yourself to yourself? And just go around and let everybody think about that, talk about that, and then just see where it goes. And so I said that. And then I finished my talk and I signed some books and thanked the woman who had organized it. And as I was leaving, in an adjacent room to where I had been talking, were 8 women in a circle talking to each other. And I thought, that's perfect. That's the ideal outcome. That's what I would say to all of you at the village. You know, for those of you who really want to unpack this and think about it, not in the privacy of your own mind, because you can only go so far in the privacy of your own mind. You need to hear how other people are thinking about things and what their experiences are. And it's just storytelling. It's just a way of making connections with other people that's unlike anything else. And so that would be my happiest. I mean, yes, please buy my books, but that's not really it. What's really it is that I would get an email from one of you 3 months from now saying we started a group and it's going and here's what we're talking about and do you have any thoughts or whatever. That would be the happiest you could make this old woman. That would be it.
Kind of a preparing for oldness group, something like that.
Sure, sure. You know, the way the gerontologists have it, God love them, they're 40, they're 40. And they have all this information, they're 40. So, but the way, and some of the information is really very useful. For me, the most useful is the way they have it broken down is the young old are 65 to 75. The old are 75 to 85, and the old are 85 to whenever we do a face plant somewhere. That's the categories. And it's very wise because the issues of life and the questions of our lives and the stages of our lives from 65 to 75 are really different than from 75 to 85. And when it's so like adolescence. When I was 12, I had absolutely no idea what 17 was going to be like, who I would be, what I would think, what I would look like, what I would feel like. It was like a foreign land. And when I wrote The Kitchen is Closed, I had no idea what it was going to be me now. I mean, it's every bit developmentally as rich and complex, full of possibilities, requiring self-awareness. It's not a time of decline, although it is a time of decline of the vessel, but the freedom that comes with this life stage where it gets to be about us. We get to be ourselves, and the status and the authority and the power and will they choose me? Do they like me? Will they invite me again? That was so important when we were 40 and 50. That's gone. It's just gone.
Yeah.
It's just gone. And with that comes so much freedom and room for what is it I want? So for example, I am right this minute swimming in this magisterial 613 page biography of James Baldwin.
Oh, yeah.
It is just stunning, but there are so many other things I should be doing, I ought to be doing. Indivisible is meeting, and this is a political catastrophe, and my friend's daughter is home, and she could probably, there's a million other shoulds and oughts that shape my life, my whole life. Because to put myself in the center would have been selfish. All young girls learn that. That's like a basic young girl thing that we learn. And now when I made a commitment to this book, I thought I'm just going to have to say no to whatever comes my way because I'm going to spend this time with James Baldwin. And that's what I'm doing. And it's like a small example, but it is not something 10 years ago I would have been able to permit myself. I mean, I would have read 2 or 3 pages before bed guiltily, but not just sit down in my chair with a bowl of popcorn next to me and my feet up and just be there for the whole afternoon. I mean, it's the kind of freedom that is hard won when you're responsible for so many lives, but it is a freedom that we have. Even as the vessel gets less and less friendly, there's a tremendous amount of freedom at this time of our lives, I think. It's certainly true for me. Yeah.
I have noticed, and I wonder if anybody else in this group has noticed, I say what I think much more often than I used to do. I have the freedom to speak, and I've given myself that. And I say things that sometimes surprise me, but there they are. Does
Good.
anybody else feel that? Is that I mean,
Absolutely. I have frequently said this is very freeing, and the freedom, the same kind of sense that Sandy talked about. I also think that probably most of us here were the good girls, and you
Yeah.
did what you were told, and you followed a certain pattern. And it isn't only the women. My husband was a good boy, and you just did what you were told and what was expected of you.
Yes.
And I don't care now either. I mean, there's certain propriety. You're not going to go off the deep end at this point, but there certainly is, especially after 80, it just was very freeing to say no to people for doing things before I get myself overly involved, and to try not to feel guilty about it. Yeah, it's a marvelous time of life if your health and resources hold out.
Yep. There's one little piece of information to just put in the mix here. When feminist psychology began to form in the 1970s, in my view, the most pivotal understanding of the re-theorizing of psychology, human psychology through a feminist lens, was that women of our generation are always navigating self and other every minute of every day from birth to death. We are always in that calculus of self and other, always, always. It was just such a stunning understanding. And I think what I'm aware of now is there's so much more self and so much less other. Now, not politically. I mean, there's some responsibilities we have in my view, that we need to commit to in this moment. But if somebody would invite me to some play of some theater group that I wasn't interested in, I would have made up such an elaborate story, a lie, because they were doing something nice. They were inviting me to join them. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want them to think I thought their taste in theater was. So I would make up a whole story. And now I say, I really appreciate the invitation, but I think I'll pass. It took me all this time to be able to just do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Would you say there are, I don't know, early childhood experiences that influenced you, your writing, or how you're living your life after 80?
Absolutely. And I'm happy to talk about them for a minute. But before that, somebody said this to me, see if I can get it right. Or maybe I read it somewhere. If mothers understood the weight of their words and actions and choices on the permanent psyches of their children, nobody would ever have children. And that's the truth of it. I mean, my kids to this day will say, when you said that and I was 7 and I felt, and, it left a wound. There isn't any way to be a mother or a father without causing wounds. That's just part of what it is to be human. So
Yeah.
for me, in my childhood, my house it was a silent house. It was a proper house. It was a well-behaved house. It was a house where the living room cushions were always fluffed up. It was not a house where there was laughter, where there was play, where there were feelings, where there were conversations over dinner about how was school or any of that. That was not the house that I grew up in. And as I got to be 9 or 10, and I started listening to the radio, because we didn't get a television till I was 13. And I would listen to the radio, and there was the Lux Radio Theater. Some of you may remember, in the Philco Radio Theater. And then when I was sick, there were the soap operas. And there were all these people talking to each other and arguing and laughing and all that stuff that I had never experienced as a kid. I understand the reasons for it now, but as a kid, this was all I understood. And I wanted, and then I started to read, went to the library and started taking out books and getting a sense of how other people lived and so on. And I thought, when I get to be big, I want to live in a world with lots and lots of words and lots of talking. I didn't have it any fancier than that in my mind, but I got that far. And one parenthetical thing to say about that, which also life is always so full of surprises. I may have made a living with language all my life, inviting language, putting down language on the page, inviting women to find their own language. And it was not until a very, very major death in my life, my brother, where for the first time, I was in my 40s, late 40s, I just ran out of words. I couldn't talk my way through this tremendous loss. And a friend of mine said to me, there's a place where so-and-so goes and they meditate. And I said, I don't believe in it. I didn't even know what she was talking about, but right away it was like, don't confuse me with new ideas. So I don't believe in it. And she said, okay, but maybe I'll go with you one day. We'll just go and we'll sit. And after, I don't know, a couple of weeks of very, very difficult grieving, I went with her and I sat down and allowed silence for the first time since my childhood. Except that what I began to learn in that experience was the wisdom of silence, the comfort of silence, the way one can hear oneself in silence, where you can't if there's words all the time. And so, in an interesting kind of way, I've returned to, I live alone, I've returned to a lot of the silence of my childhood, but it's a comforting, nurturing silence now. That's kind of been the arc for me, but for each of us, we leave our homes of our families of origin, hoping to leave behind those parts of our family of origin homes that we don't want to take with us, except they cling to us. They're with us, whether we want them to be with us or not. And so the question becomes, how do we befriend them? That becomes the life question. How do we befriend those places? So for me, the place was silence, and it was in a meditation practice that I was able to befriend what had originally been a wound.
That's really a beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'll say one other thing in this moment where there seems to be some hesitancy to speak. One of the things that has always been important to me in the books that I've written and the films that I've made 2 films, and the public person that I've been most of my life, is that I never, ever want to be seen as, oh my God, Sandra Butler, and she said this and she said that, and she's so fabulous, and oh my God. I always wanted to be someone that people came away saying, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's a very, very different way of trying to be, wanting to be seen. There is nothing I have done in my life that everybody else can't do. I'm just putting it into some words, maybe as a conduit for other people. But thank you for liking the story.
Well, it seems to me that you are just putting into words what probably many of us think about,
That's what I hope. That's what I,
don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
And, you said it earlier, make a decision sooner rather than later, make it now when it's your decision rather than when it's made for you almost.
well, I'm also saying another thing, Gina. I'm also saying in my life, I think that the deepest yearning that everybody has is to be known, is to be seen, is to be witnessed, is to be apprehended in their life. So I'm not just talking about decision making. I'm talking about this is what it is to be me. What is it like to be you? That's what I'm talking about. I think that's our deepest yearning and our biggest fear. And once we take the step towards beginning at the rate of speed that everybody can tolerate, opening ourselves, revealing ourselves, seeing the ways in which everything that we thought would be so different one from the other turns out to be so many ways in which we echo one another. So that's really what I'm saying. Not the decisions are part of it, but what is it to be me? I want you to know what it's been to be me, and I want to know what it's been to be you. That's at the bottom of everything. Yeah.
Well, I have kind of a different story than many because I have no children and I'm not attached to any family. So I don't have some of those things that you have, but it has taken me a long time. I was always a good girl and very responsible and willing to take care of other people. But in the last, I would say 5 years, it has been a lot easier for me to do what you just spoke of. I'm still working, but in between working, when I just sit down and read a book and it's like, well, the dishes and the laundry and oh well, it'll be there tomorrow.
I had a very wise woman say to me once, the day that you die, your inbox will be full. It was
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
was a very good thing to
Yeah.
hold, you know. Part of, for me, in my 50s and 60s was I just need to get to the far side of this, whatever this was, and then I'll get that. And there is a difference. There's choice. And every minute is a choice. That minute. Yeah. And let me just also say, neither of my daughters have children. One by choice, one because she was unable to. And so they're moving into their aging. My firstborn will be 68 in December. And they're moving into a very particular kind of aging because there's not continuity. So that's a particular, but I mean, Yes, I'm saying that to you, Gina, because rather than leading with, here's how I'm different, maybe leading with, here's another dimension of how we are all going to age. Here's mine. So that it's not the difference. It's here's a dimension of it that's yours. My kids, I have no grandchildren. There's not continuity for me. That's a dimension of my aging. And it's the richness of being able to learn that about one another that's so moving and so powerful. We're not so different from one another. We just carry
Yeah,
dimensions of a human experience. Yeah.
yeah. When you said your firstborn was 68, is that what you said?
Yep.
I'm just reminded of something that my friends and I sometimes used to bat around, and we would say, how can somebody as young as I am have such old kids?
Right. Right. Well, that's really because, and I know this is true, none of us are nearly as grown up and mature as we like to pretend we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
When
it's that thing too, when we catch, I mean, I do, I'll say for myself, when I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, just unconsciously, I mean, I know better, just unconsciously, I smile to make my face look a little better because I can't believe that's my face. So I smile. It doesn't always, but it's just, yeah, the inside and the outside don't really correspond all that well the older we get. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I have always heard, people refer to the old ladies and those old folks. And so to me, that's always been a pejorative.
It
And
is.
it is a pejorative, isn't it? And so I prefer to be called elderly. And
Whatever you
yet,
prefer is what you should be called. We get to name how we want to be
ah,
called. And
okay,
I don't
thank
want
you.
to be called hun or sweet or
No,
every time it happens, I say something. I say it with kindness because I'm assuming they don't know better.
right,
But I
right.
say it every time because that's my job. I have to educate the ones who don't know, and I say it. So if you want elderly, that's what you got to just say. That's what you want.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's like the young ones now with the ways they want to be called. I've sort of short-circuited the whole thing and I just say they for everything because otherwise it's a little bit too confusing. So I just say they. But yeah, we all get to be called exactly what we want to be called. That's ours. Yeah.
Our senior center has a project where a painter's been painting small portraits of anybody who wants them painted. Has anybody seen them? And it's just so, it's kind of the, the opposite of not being seen, that people's pictures are up on the wall now. So it's kind of sweet.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's a perfect example. Yeah. So I leave you with the hope that you'll think about, well, maybe I could try a circle. Let's see. That'll be my hope as I go into, it's only 6:30 here as I go into my evening. But even if you don't, I hope I've given you enough to chew over and think about. And thank you for inviting me.
yeah. And thank you for joining us, Sandra. This has been a wonderful program, and we hope sometime you will come back and talk to us again about your latest book entitled what?
Now what?
Now what? Oh, yes.
Notes from the front lines of old
Yeah.
age. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you all. Thank you all very much.
Right.
So much. Bye, Sandy.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
My
Have a
pleasure.
good evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.